בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. We are in the second part of our shiur about Rabbi Yekutiel Yehudah Halberstam, known better as the Sons Klausenburger Rebbe. And I would begin with a first recap of what we spoke about last week, and then I would like to continue telling the story of the Klausenburger Rebbe, and especially his rebuilding of the Hasidut, both in the USA and mainly here next to us in Netanya. So, again, a short recap. Rabbi Yekutiel Yehudah Halberstam was born in 1905 in Rodnik, Galicia. He was born to a very, very ancient and powerful Hasidic, as much as Hasidic can be ancient, but a very important Hasidic family, already a few generations, and it was a scion of the Divrei Chaim, Rav Chaim Halberstam, a very, very known Hasidic Rebbe, and the Posek. That is an important combination that Rav Halberstam himself would also apply in his own life, of being a Hasidic leader, but also a halachic decider. So Torah and Hasidut, very important combination in his life. The general atmosphere in Galicia, in Hungary, is one of what we'd call today Kanaut, meaning that an opposition to everything that basically is new, so to modernism, to Zionism, to secularism, to enlightenment, everything that does not completely in accordance with the way, perceived at least, of how our forefathers lived 200 years ago is asur, and what we aspire to do is to continue very faithfully the way of our fathers. That's the way that they saw it, and it was a very rich and thick and wonderful Jewish community in Hasidut that Rav Halberstam was born into. Unfortunately, his father passed away when he was only 13 during the First World War, and from there on he becomes his own man. He's a very strong. He has a very strong personality, and again he's being ordained in 1920 as he's 15. He's being married a year later. He becomes the Rav of Klausenburg. As I said, Klausenburg already had a Rav. It was Rav Glasner, but he was a Zionist. So the more orthodox elements or the more right-wing elements of the community wanted a more right-wing Rebbe. So they brought Klausenburg Rebbe. They brought Rabbi Yekutiel Yehudah Halberstam, and he justifies his bringing by really being the most outspoken speaker for and advocate for Hasidut, for old schoolness, for everything that he stood for, which was beautiful and wonderful. And he and his wife had 11 children. He's being asked to come to Yerushalayim. Maybe he should take the Rabbanut there, but he heeds to the advice of his mother and remains in Europe. That's in 1937. That's, of course, a step that he would later regret. In 1939, Second World War begins. 1941, I apologize. If you want to have the whole story, it's an amazing story, but we spoke about it last week. So in 1941, in 19th of March 1940, excuse me, in 1941 is arrested by the Hungarian fascist government for a short time, but his community are able to release him. In 1944, the Nazis take over Hungary, and then they establish a ghetto in Klausenburg, and he's there leading the Jews of Klausenburg. And in Shavuot 1944, he and 9 of his children and his wife are all being deported to Auschwitz. And they don't know where they are going to. They don't understand. Although it's 1944, it's very famous that the Jews of Hungary were not aware of the situation. and his wife and 9 children are immediately being sent to the gas chambers and are murdered, and he stays there alone. Two of his children are still alive. One of them would die a few weeks before liberation, and the oldest one, his firstborn, would pass away a week after liberation. That's again not so known a phenomena, but unfortunately it was very common that Jews were able to survive the all of the war, and then immediately after the war they died either of starvation or sometimes of eating too much after being starved, and also diseases were rampant, and so unfortunately many died after liberation. So all of his children, all 11 children died during or immediately after the World War II. He's being liberated, and we spoke about his role in the camp. He insists not to eat trifot, although he allowed and commanded everyone else to eat. He himself did not eat taref. He insisted on wearing tefillin, although it was extremely dangerous, and he also let others wear his tefillin. He says about himself that he was able almost not to discredit the Shabbat, which is, I don't know, it's almost unthinkable how that was done. One story I would like to relate again to one story, which I think is extremely important, is about how he was hit by a certain German guard, and then a secular Jew that was there asked him, "Do you still say Ata bechartanu?" Of course, I sent you the story. I think no, I sent you the story of eating taref. I would like also maybe Bezrat Hashem after the shiur to send you the video of that, because he also tells that he has this wonderful Yiddish, although that I really don't really understand Yiddish, but there is a certain type of an Yiddish that you can understand just from listening. So he tells the story, relates to the story, how so this guy comes to him and he's still beaten on the ground, and he asks him, "Do you still say Asa vechartini?" Right? So do you still say Ata bechartanu? Do you still thank God for choosing the Jewish people? How can you still say that after you have been humiliated in such a way? And the Klausenburger Rebbe answers, of course, even if up till now, I said it without enough kavana, without enough intention, now we said it with the proper intention, because I understand that if God would not have chosen me, I would be like the German guard. And I prefer to be the Jew than the German. That was his answer, I think extremely inspiring. And others say that when he was working, so he was worked in forced labor camp by the Germans, and they say that he would always say psukim when he was working. And once someone was able to listen to what he's mumbling, and he was saying, "Tachat asher lo avadeta et Hashem Elokecha besimcha ubetuv levav umerov kol." So he was quoting a pasuk from the Tochecha, from the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu, in which he says that because we did not worship, we did not work Hashem, service God with all of our power and might while we were happy, that now we have to serve the Gentiles. So he saw everything that happens to him as a punishment for his shortcomings, which is difficult to again imagine. But these are the stories that are being told. He was liberated in 1945, a year and a month after being deported to Auschwitz. And very soon he learns about the ptira of all of his children and of course his wife. They say that on the first Shabbat, they were still in the camp. The Americans liberated them, but they were in basically the work camps became DP camps, because I mean deported personnel camps, because there was no other place to put them. The non-Jews were able. It was called repatriation, I think. Repatriation, thank you. To go back to their homes in their homelands. But for the Jews, there were no homelands anymore. The few Jews that tried to go back, I think known stories in Yassi, in Romania, in other places, Jews were trying to come back. So the locals were very happy basically with the Jews living and them being able to take over the real estate. So they made pogroms. Some Jews that survived all of the Holocaust came back to their homes and just to be murdered by their neighbors. in their local towns. So most of the Jews just remain in the DP camps and try to understand where they can continue to. And so in this first Shabbat, he's there. They are still wearing the prisoner uniforms because they didn't receive any new clothes. And they are there, and this is the first Shabbat. So the Rebbe is trying to arrange for a tish, not only tefillot Shabbat, of course. He says, we are back, we are back to work. I need to give the tish. I think I already told you that even during the war itself, even there was no one around, he would give divrei Torah for the tish to himself. So now that we have been liberated, that's time to return. People thought that he's completely out of his mind, and he was hardly able to get a minyan, a quorum of 10 Jews for the tefillah and then for the Kiddush that he was doing with the tish. And they say, the story goes, that he begins to sing the Shalom Aleichem. Now, in the Sons and in other Chassidut, they have a short tefillah. It's called Ribono Shel Olam before the Kiddush. I think it's in out of Hasidic realms that is not known. But and they have there a line saying that I lit the candles and I prepared the bed and I put the food on the table, that everything is ready for the Shabbat to come. And he changed the orders of the words. And instead, he's saying it in the regular tune, but instead of singing, I lit the candles and I prepared the bed, he was, excuse me, he was singing, you, God, have lit my bed. You have burned my bed, meaning you have burned my home, my house, my wife, my 11 children. And he's standing there and he's singing and he's crying, and everyone, of course, all the people around, all the 10 are crying with him. And we have testimonies because the people that were there, that was one of the most strong experiences. And he completes to sing, he ends the singing, and he says, but nonetheless, everything that has been done to me, I'm still doing a Kiddush, I'm still doing the Shabbat, and I still have faith in God. And he's doing the Kiddush. They say that the next morning there were above 100 people in the tefillah because word spread about this special man, holy man in the camp, and people came for the Shacharit. Shabbat is over, and he's still there in the DP camp, and they begin to prepare themselves. It was, as you can imagine, it was extremely difficult. The responsible person from the Americans was General Patton. Now, he's a very known man, but not necessarily known for his good relationship with the Jews. Now, that's a story that is not the place to tell the story. But now, again, I am not an expert in American history and not in, and here I read mostly the information coming from the Hasidic side. It may be that the people that continued Patton had a different idea, but however, they think that he was almost, maybe he was an anti-Semitic, and he himself, there is a line. It seems that, again, I didn't see the books themselves, so I have to be careful here. I quote from sources that are not necessarily completely accurate, but they say that he wrote in his diary that some people think that the departed people, you should behave to them like they are human beings. He says, but they are less than that. And the Jews are especially a different thing. Now, again, that's what they write in his name. I have to be careful here. But it seems that people were, but again, the situation was extremely difficult anyway. But they felt that the Americans are not behaving to them in a proper manner. And in the end, word came back to the United States about that. And they decided that General Eisenhower would make a visit around the DP camps in order to see how things are going on. So Eisenhower came to where Rabbi Halberstam was, and it was on Yom Kippur. It happened to be. It was on Yom Kippur. So on Yom Kippur at night, the Klausenburger Rebbe is giving a sermon before Kol Nidrei, or immediately after Kol Nidrei, and he gives a drasha, and he begins the drasha saying, "We are saying the vidui, ashamnu, bagadnu," but he says the vidui is not for us. How can someone steal? We had nothing this year. How can you steal when you have nothing? Dibarnu dofi, how can we speak bad when we are not even able to speak? We have to be quiet the whole time. And he goes scene by scene and says that all of that does not relate to us. But there is one scene that maybe we have seen, and that is that we lost hope. So that is what we should make our video on. That's what we should ask for forgiveness on for this Yom Kippur, and that is that we have lost hope and faith, and we must regain hope and faith. And that is the message with which he inspired his kahal, his congregation there, to make the Yom Kippur. And again, we have many testimonies about that. It was an extremely powerful drasha. The next morning, now it is not clear. There are different historic accounts if General Eisenhower was in that sermon. So that is, I am not sure. The next morning, there was after or morning or noon after Tefillah, there was an event with General Eisenhower. I mean, the Americans did not care about Yom Kippur. So again, General Eisenhower came. He asked to meet with the different leaders of the camp, and some of the people asked for Rabbi Halberstam to give a sermon in front of the general. Others, more of the secular, the Zionist groups that were there, they were very worried that Rabbi Halberstam would, he's out of place, out of context. He would seen by the Americans as a weirdo. We don't need him to speak. In the end, they came to a compromise that Rabbi Halberstam would speak, but very shortly, and he would not mention Hashem, and he would not mention Yom Kippur. Now, as you can imagine, immediately as Rabbi Halberstam went up, he was with his talit, and it was on Yom Kippur. They say he was not able to acquire a kittel. So he didn't have a kittel. But he had the talit, he had the shtreimel, and he is going up to the Duchan, and of course, he blessed them with a drasha of an hour and a half, and speaking about Hashem, and speaking about that General Eisenhower has to, of course, everything in English. General Eisenhower has to see himself as a missionary, as a shaliach of Hashem, to liberate the Jews, etc., etc., etc. Now, here again, there are different historical accounts. His Hasidim say it was extremely powerful, and the general was overwhelmed, and everything was good and beautiful. Again, they say, I don't know, but they say that Patton wrote in his diary that it was so revolving seeing this filthy rabbi stand with his clothes and everything that he had to throw up his meal afterwards. Now, again, I'm not, I didn't check the sources inside. That's how they describe it. And I can imagine, even if if both sides are exaggerated, I also can understand that some would think that it was extremely wonderful. How can a rabbi speak after all of the Holocaust for an hour and a half? And the general is sitting there, and they would see it as amazing. And others would think that that was completely out of place. So I think that's very easy for us to understand how there would be different historical accounts. However, the general comes to the Rebbe after and says, "What can I do for you?" And of course, everyone thinks that he would ask him, I don't know, to give him a certificate, to let him go to the USA. But people wanted to go out of this place. Rabbi Halberstam says, "We are on Yom Kippur, Sukkot is around the corner, and we are not able to acquire Arbat Aminim. So if you can please make sure that we would have kosher Arbat Aminim set in the camp." That was what he was thinking about. And indeed, General Eisenhower makes sure that there would be a chaplain, a rabbi that would be escorting Rabbi Halberstam and making sure that he gets everything that he needs. Okay. After this Yom Kippur, so things begin to settle down, but still there are many Jews, and there would be for the next year, or even a little more, there would be many Jews that would be displaced and without a place to go to, and they would stay in the camps for many months. There are books that were written on this period, a very difficult period. And Rav Halberstam himself later said that in certain sense, this period was more difficult than the war itself. Now that seems to us, again, how can you say such a thing? But he said, all throughout the war, we said to ourselves that such a suffering, it must be that immediately after the war, there would come Mashiach. There would be redemption. There is no other way. So we held to this hope, to this faith, and it gave us strength to go through all of the horrors. But then the war ended, and it was General Patton. It was not, it was not Mashiach, and we just remained where we were, and there was nowhere to go. There was no brighter future. Just it was what it was. And that was such, he said, many people that were still clinging to mitzvot throughout all of the war stopped performing mitzvot, observing mitzvot, not in the camp. In the camp, they endangered their life in order to don't feel in. But after the war, when it was easy, they didn't want to anymore. Because they said, why are we toiling? For what? So that was, again, very, very difficult times. And Rav Halberstam begins to arrange a whole operation that he called Shefa HaPleita, the remaining of those the remaining force, Shefa HaPleita. And he did not only took care of the place that he was in was called Feldafing. I'm surely I'm butchering the pronunciation, but Feldafing. But he was not only taking care of the Jews there, but throughout all of Europe, he was sending letters and making journeys, arranging yeshivot, arranging for kosher kitchens, because now it's after the war, we can eat kosher. People got used to just eat what they are being given. So they were in the camp, they ate what the Germans gave. Then the Americans came, they ate what the Americans gave. But there was no reason anymore to eat treif. So he was arranging for kosher kitchens, he was arranging for yeshivot.
So my mother was volunteering in the American Army in 1946-47, and the Jewish soldiers, they got together on Sundays, and they would go to the DP camps and bring them oranges and that they have never seen, the
Beautiful.
peels they wouldn't know.
Beautiful.
And they would ask them to write to some relatives in English, send letters to America.
Beautiful. Yeah, hoping that someone would maybe take them in. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, these are the stories. These are the stories. He was making effort to give proper burial because again, Jews got used that if someone chas v'chayila dies, then it's again for us it seems unbelievable. But yeah, you throw him somewhere. Millions died. There was no Kvurat Israel for 5 years, 4 years. There was no Kvura, there was no Shiva, there was no Avelo, there was no nothing. And there is, again, this is a horrifying account of a young boy, I think he was 16 or 15 at the time that I read, that later became one of the followers of the Klausenburger Rebbe, and he writes about him, he became very close to him. And he was 15 or 16, as I said, in time of liberation. And he says that his father died immediately after the liberation. And the child didn't even think that he needs to make any arrangements for burial or for sitting shiva. It was completely out of his mind. And I don't think that anyone here would judge or blame him for that. And the Rebbe told him, no, we would make sure that your father gets a Kvurat Israel, a proper Jewish burial, and you sit Shiva. And the Rebbe sat next to him and helped him. And that made, so you see that how that he took care of every child and everyone. Of course, that's made him a lot of, he didn't do it in order to get Hasidut, he did it in order to help people. But of course, people were looking for someone to give them hope. And Rav Klausenburg, the Klausenburg Rebbe had this resilience that enabled him to give them the hope in these times of despair and light in times of darkness. He was also arranging, and that was in change from his position before the war, and that is for Batei Yaakov, for schools for girls. Before the war, it was one of these new things that we should fight against. But after the war, he understands that, of course, you cannot let all of these young girls, Jewish girls, orphaned. Everyone was orphaned. There is nothing you cannot speak about anymore about learning at home. There is no home anymore. The homes were shattered, were destroyed. Even if someone's parents survived, but they were in a DP camp, what they can teach? They were broken people. He wanted to give good Jewish soil, good Jewish education to boys and to girls. And he established a Batei Yaakov, again, around the DP camps. And there is an amazing story. I guess that it's the next Yom Kippur. It's not the first Yom Kippur, it's the second Yom Kippur in the DP camps. And they say he had already hundreds of girls in this Bate Yaakov. And again, according to the story, he sees a girl just before Yom Kippur, and she's crying her heart out. And he asks her, "What's the matter?" And she says, "Every year before Yom Kippur, my father would give me a bracha for the children before Yom Kippur, and he's not here anymore." So the Rebbe said, "I will give you the bracha." And he takes her into his room, and he puts a talit on her head, and he puts his hands above her head, and he says the bracha of Birkat HaNeharim of Yom Kippur. And the girls go out, and she tells her friends. And he says, the story goes that there was a line of 100 girls in front of the Rebbe's room, and each one would go in, and he would give her a bracha. Now, of course, he made himself the father of these boys and girls, and they followed him from there on. So that was the first 2 years, more or less, after the Holocaust. And he himself would relate later that he had three goals, main goals, right, beyond just kashrut and kedusha and Torah, which of course are what he did in his daily activities. But his main goals was he said, I understood that we need to make aliyah. We need to make aliyah. The second thing is, and it is related, of course, he understood that he wants to live among Jews. And the third, to live among Jews, even secular ones, but not around the goyim anymore. And the third one was, I want to rebuild the world that was destroyed. As he saw it, the ideal world of Hungary, of Galicia, of the Hasidut, he want to rebuild it. And now there may be a tension between these goals, because at the beginning it seemed that the best place to rebuild was not in Eretz Israel, where maybe they were very poor, there was a war going on, the leaders were anti-religious, or at least that's the way that he saw it, and it's not very far from the truth. And he was right. The leaders of the Jewish settlement, the Yishuv Yehudi, and very soon of Medinat Israel, their first priority was not to rebuild the Hasidic war that was destroyed in the Holocaust. That was very far in their priority list. So he thought that the best place maybe to reconstruct would be to begin in the United States. Now, that does not completely comply with the first two goals that I spoke about, which is making Aliyah and living among Jews. But he thought that's the most important thing. So in 1946, when he sees that the DP camps are beginning to completely dry out of people, he goes to the United States, and he says in the boat where he go with some of his followers, now he already has some constituency, he says to them, we are going to the United States, but that's a station in our journey to Eretz Israel. It's a station. Now, I don't know how many people told themselves that when they went to America at these times, but he was the person that when he says something, he would stand behind it. So he goes there, and in the United States, he remarries. So after losing his wife and 11 children, he remarries. That's in itself. And now, but it may be that some of us here are descendants to this type of families that were reestablished after the Holocaust. But nonetheless, I think it's amazing, regardless if you're the Klausenburger Rebbe or just a simple Yid, that you can rebuild yourself after such a complete. Many Jews were not able to, and they remained alone. I'm sure that some of us know of relatives that remained unmarried after the Holocaust. And again, who can? I don't think that we're in any place to judge anyone. But any person that was able to remarry and rebuild himself, his family, and financially, and restand on his legs, in itself, that's a miraculous feat. And he rebuilds a new family, getting married with Chaya Nechama Unger. Again, she was a daughter of Shmuel David Unger, a very famous, important rabbi and the leader in Slovakia. He was a chashuv man, so he married into an important family. The next 9 years, he is in the United States. He begins in Williamsburg. However, there he has tensions with the Satmar Rebbe. Now, they were relatives. I think I mentioned it last week. They were relatives, but A, between relatives, sometimes you can have more fights than among strangers. And B, we have to understand, because he came from a very, how can I say fanatic without saying something that is negative? I don't mean negative, but he came from a very pious background that opposes everything that is modern. And the Satmar remained that, and you may say, double down. But the Klausenburger Rebbe had different lessons learned from the Holocaust. He said, our problem was that others built and we cried. So they remained with what they built and we remained with the tears. Now it's time for us to build, and if someone wants, he can cry. And that was his he says, I'm going to build, and if I need to cooperate with the Zionists or with secular Jews, I would cooperate with anyone that would be able to help me. That was his position. Of course, the Satmar Rebbe held a very different position. And it's not that the Klausenburger Rebbe became, do not be confused, he did not become a Zionist and he did not become a modern. Very far from it. But he was willing to cooperate in order to advance what he thought was, we may say, pikuach nefesh, to rebuild. It was actually a pikuach nefesh, and also a ruchni, a spiritual pikuach nefesh, to rebuild the Jewish world. And in the end, because of this tension with Satmar, he decided that he would leave Williamsburg, where the Satmar were very strong, and he would move to Union City in New Jersey, where I've never been there, but to the best of my knowledge, to this day, there is a presence of his Hasidic sect. In 1955, after 9 years in the United States, he makes good of his word, and he comes to Eretz Israel, and he deliberates where to establish his Hasid. He wants to establish a Hasidic court, not only a court, a Hasidic city. You may almost say a Hasidic shtetl. And the natural choice would be either in Bnei Brak, where you already had a strong presence of Haredi Jews, or in Yerushalayim. Netanya is off the charts. What is there here? Nothing, nothing and nothing. Sand, nothing. And religiously, even less. Even less. Yeah, you really had here nothing. Even on Haifa, I think you had more religious, and Haifa was red, as they say. I think you had more religious infrastructure than around here. But he decides that he wants his own place, and where he can build according to what he believes. If he would be in Bnei Brak, or if he would be in Yerushalayim, then there may be others that will tell him what to do. Now you remember the 13-year-old child fighting with the local Rav, where his father would be buried. So here his independent mind again, I think, emerges, and he establishes Kiryat Sanz, as is well known to this day. He establishes that in Netanya, and he cooperates with the state. And he meets with Ben Gurion. There are some very beautiful and interesting pictures. You can just Google Ben Gurion and the Klausenburger Rebbe, and they have pictures together. And you see Ben Gurion didn't wear a kippah in order to meet the Klausenburger Rebbe. And so it's Ben Gurion looking like a Ben Gurion, and the Klausenburger Rebbe looks like a Hasidic Rebbe, and they speak together. And it's very interesting. We have some accounts of what they were speaking about. And of course, they were very far in their views of what should become of the Jewish people. But they were able to cooperate. And indeed, many of his Hasidim made Aliyah after him. And he establishes, as I said, the Kiryat Hasidit. He was extremely devoted to Torah learning and teaching. And he was establishing here Batei Talmud Torah and schools. However, he believed that if someone does not learn, I don't want to say properly, but if someone sees that his life mission is not in learning, then he should go out and work, as was, by the way, the minhag in the Hasidic world throughout most of history. And that was, I don't know what is going on in Sanz nowadays. I have no idea. But I was learning with a son of a Tzanzer Chassid in the Yeshiva Tichonit, where I learned. His father was working in the, I think now it's allowed to say, I guess that he's in pension now. So he was working in the Shabak, or in the Mossad, I think in the Mossad, I don't know. It was a secret intelligence service. They didn't tell us where exactly. And so they were completely, and in a sense, he was a Zionist, not completely. He was an adherent of the Klausenburger Rebbe, but he was not a strange. He was just part of the people that were around there. Now, again, things are always changing, and it may be that this type of a combination is not possible anymore. I really do not know. But that's what he was educating for. He establishes mif'alim, institutions that were not only geared towards his own Hasidim, but towards all the citizens of Israel. That's both religiously. He established what he called mif'al hashas. Now, what is mif'al hashas? He was worried, how would we grow up the new generation of rabbis, of rabbanim? Now, not only someone that would be a rab somewhere and give a nice sermon, that's fine, that you can have. But someone that would really steeped in Torah. Now, again, he has in mind what he saw back in the old country, in Europe, people that were steeped in Torah, in learning, and he wants to establish that. How would he do so? And the yeshivot are still meager in Israel, especially Hasidic yeshivot, almost non-existent. And he opens what he called Mif'al HaShas. Now, it's not a yeshiva. Mif'al HaShas is you can register, and he didn't care. If you are Hasidic, if you are a Litvak, if you are a Yemenite, you can be whatever you want, maybe even secular. But what you would get a test. Every month, there would be a test. You would come to a certain place, and you would take an exam, and about 20, later 50, then 100, then 300, then 1,000 pages of Talmud. And if you get above a certain degree, you are getting stipend. Very easy. Because he had a presence in the United States, he had an arm there to raise funds, so he was able to raise funds. They thought when they went out with this innovation, they thought there would be a few dozen people that would register. There were hundreds immediately, and after a couple of years, there were thousands of people taking exams, hundreds of dapim, hundreds of plots, of pages of Talmud, something that was very, again, unbelievable, that here in Eretz Israel would be able to, again, rekindle the spirit of Torah learning. Now, you would say it's not a lishma, it's not a person should sit and learn without hoping for a stipend, but he was trying to rebuild. So that was Mifal Hashas. Nowadays it's known as Dirshu. Maybe some of you are aware of that, but it's to this day it is still going on in a certain type. It's not under Tzanz anymore. It's just grew up to such a monumental size that it was above the ability of one Hasidut to arrange. But the seeds are there. The seeds are in Mifal Hashas. He said, we need to build an hotel. Sands Hotel. I don't know if any one of you had been there. Galeit Sands, it's called. It's on the beach in Netanya. It's a beautiful hotel, by the way. Very mehadrin kashrut. Excellent. Yeah, excellent hotel. Now, people told him, that's what you have to build. We understand Torah, we understand. But yeah, he said, yeah, we need to establish normal life here. People need here to be happy. They are not supposed to be sad all the time. There is no reason why to. We are people of hope. We are people of faith. You remember these were his messages. We are people of hope. We are people of faith. And we can go out on a vacation on the beach. So he established, of course, he wanted his Hasidim and other not to go to hotels that may have halakhic problems of certain types, but to remain in a more proper place. And that is the sounds of there. Later, he establishes the Bet Cholim, the Laniado. Now, when he began to speak about it, people thought, that's before Ma'anei Yeshua in Nebrak, that's before, what are you speaking about? A Satmar Rebbe would build a hospital. So he began to raise money. They saw that he is able to get some money. So the people that he was advising with told him, we would build the hospital and you can put the mezuzah. And he says, no, I would build the hospital, and you can put the mezuzah if you want. He was involved in almost any aspect of building the hospital. And again, there are beautiful pictures of him going with the mumchim, with the different experts, and he's wearing white clothes, and that's a but with the streimel of, and it's a beautiful picture, beautiful pictures. And he made himself involved in every aspect. Both halachically, that was simple to be involved. He didn't agree to any bedi'eved. He said, if we build something, we build it lechatchila for Shabbat, for Yom Tov, for Kashrut. Everything would be top notch. And we had the merit of one of our children being born there, and it was on Shabbat. That's why we just yeah. So that's and it was a beautiful experience. There is no difference if you're a Tzanz Chassid, if you're a Litvak, if you're the Tilum, whatever. They don't care. They really don't care. And it's an excellent for what it does. It's an excellent hospital. There are also other excellent hospitals, but it's an excellent hospital, and that is all out of his devotion. And I would like to read with you what he said in the ceremony of opening. It took a long time. As you can imagine, being a hospital took a long time. And when he built it, that's what he had to say. Baruch Hashem, they expand it. Hopefully only for Yoldot and good things.
They have nurses or something who walk behind to write down things on Shabbat.
Yeah, everything is made lechatchila. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. So that's source Daled, and I copied it from the site, from the internet site, and that's from the words that the Klausenburger Rebbe told when they opened the hospital. Okay, so it's a very simple language, as you will see, because it's from oral speech. אני זוכר, source ד', אני זוכר שירו בי ביד. I remember they shot me at the hand. Speaks during obviously the war in the camp. פחדתי ללכת למרפאה שהחזיקו הנאצים. So they had there, in the camp, they had some medical institution. But he says, I didn't want to go there. Although there were medics there, אף גם שהיו שם רופאים, ידעתי שאם אכנס לשם לא אצא חי לעולם. I knew that if I would go into the hospital, the Nazi hospital, I'm not getting out alive. כשירו בי ונפצעתי, מה עשיתי? So when they shot me and I got injured, what did they do? למרות הפחד מהנאצים, although I was terrified from the Nazis, ניגשתי לעץ, I approached a tree, כתבתי עלה, he took a leaf from the tree, והידקתי אותו בחוזקה על הפצע כדי שיעצור את הדם. So he made a bandage for himself in order to stop the bleeding from a leaf. אחר כך כתבתי ענף, then I took the branch from the tree, וקשרתי אותו מסביב לפצע. And he tied the branch around in order to hold the bandage, כדי שהעלה יחזיק מעמד. השם עזר, ותוך 3 ימים הבראתי. Now again, that's unbelievable. I guess that the bullet didn't get inside, only injured him from the outside. Otherwise, it's very difficult to imagine that after 3 days he would be healed. אז קיבלתי על עצמי, says, then in the war, I took it upon myself. שאם השם ייתן לי חיים ואבריא, if I would have the life, God grant me life and health, הרי נראיתי אז כמו מוזלמן. He said, leave aside being injured from a bullet. I look like a Muslim. Muslim means something that's extremely thin and has no chances of survive. ואצא מכאן, if I would live and be healthy and I would be out, אצא מכאן מהרשעים הללו, and I would be able to get saved from these evil people, אבנה בית חולים, I would build a hospital, שיהיה מיוסד על כך שהרופאים והאחיות יאמינו שיש אלוקים בעולם. So I want to build a hospital in which the doctors and the nurses, they know there is a God in the world. I doesn't say they have to be observant, but they have to know there is a God. וידעו, so they would know, people would know, שכשניגשים לרפא חולה, so the doctors would know, when you come to heal a patient, עושים את המצווה הגדולה ביותר בתורה. So people should not be afraid to go to the hospital. He was afraid back there because the doctors there did not believe in God. And how they said the oath, why the Hippocrates oath, that didn't stand, I guess. the Nazi persecution. So he said, I want doctors like the Miyaldot, the women that were taking care of the babies in Egypt, that when Paro came to them and he said, you should kill the baby, they said, no, we fear God. So that is the hospital I wanted to build, and that's how he built. Now, from thinking you want to build a hospital to building a hospital, there is still a long way, but he was a man of vision and man of deed, and he was able to build the hospital. Now, of course, that doesn't mean, excuse me, just a second. They sent a message to the second. I see that everything is fine. The audio stopped. I don't know. Okay, anyhow. I hope that the audio is back. And again, so that doesn't mean, as I said, building the hospital, building the hotel, making the Mifal HaShas, that doesn't mean that he stopped being a Hasidic rabbi and he stopped making sure that his community would remain a stable community and a safe community. Safe, I mean here, from outside influences. And he was, so it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult for us to understand this balance because he was looking outwards. He was giving, as I said, care both in the hotel and in the hospital and in Mifal HaShas to all Jews. But at the same time, he was building very high walls around his own community. So, for example, he was extremely against speaking Hebrew. And in his institutions, again, I don't know what is going on now, but I guess it's still, they were teaching in Yiddish and speaking Yiddish. And he has a response about that. So that is here, if you look at source A, yes. So that's an answer from 1973. 77. 1977. במה שנשאלתי לחוות דעתי על דרך הלימוד בתלמודי תורה ובתי החינוך לבנות. So I was asked to give my opinion regarding the way to teach in Talmud Torah and in girls' schools, בתי החינוך לבנות, לפי דרכי אבותינו הקדושים, according to the ways of our holy fathers. Now you see immediately that he says we have to cling to our Mesorah. It doesn't say according to halacha. It says, לפי דרכי אבותינו הקדושים. Now, there is almost an oxymoron inside this sentence, because according to דרכי אבותינו הקדושים, there is no בתי חינוך לבנות, there is no schools for girls. But that is a step that he already took, so I guess that's already became part of the tradition. So he says, they asked me to give my opinion, שיש רוצים לשמוע דעתי בזה. באתי בזה לברר לאנשי שלומנו. I speak here to אנשי שלומנו, אנש, our people. Our people. So that's a label on the response. He almost says, he says to me, you, Baruch, you shouldn't read that. That's an answer to Anshe Shlomenu. Now, that's a stark difference from the hospital, right, or the hotel. And here he says, I'm giving you my opinion, le'anshe Shlomenu. I do not argue here with others. So I also don't argue on halachic basis. Halacha is universal in the sense that it applies to all Jews in equation. But he says, I speak here to אנשי שלומנו. המקור לדרך שהנהיגו אבותינו ורבותינו הקדושים מדור דור. So our forefathers and rabbis had these מנהגים, כי החינוך, our education, our חינוך, נבנה על יסוד דברי רבותינו הקדושים אשר מפיהם אנו חיים. So the foundation of our education is built on our holy rabbis, that rabbis here is not the sages, it's speaking about the rebbes. From their mouth we live, and that is שלא ירגיל אדם עצמו לדבר בלשון עכו"ם. We must not get used to speak in the language of the non-Jews, of the goyim. Now, of course, many of them knew a little in Hungarian, a little Polish. It was allowed because you had to do business, but that's not become your mother tongue. לכן בוודאי שחס וחלילה להניח שפת אבותינו מדורו. So it's חס God forbid that we would abandon Yiddish, the language of our forefathers from generations, ולהשתמש בלשונם של עוברי עבירה, and we would use the language of those that are sinners. So a sentence ago we spoke about differentiating ourselves from the non-Jews. immediately applies that to differentiate yourself from non-observant Jews. And then he says, אולי לכך קוראים עברית. So the reason it's called Ivrit is because the people that speak it is over, so over Aveirot. So that's why it's called Ivrit. ורוב המילים בדו מליבם רחמנא ליצלן. So he says the most of the language is made up. It's not even לשון הקודש. I don't go here into linguistic analysis of modern Hebrew, but he says that most of the words were invented, ואם יש בו ביטויים של לשון הקודש, זה עוד מגביר האיסור. Says that if they do use some לשון הקודש terms and coins, that's even more אסור, because they take something that is holy and they put it into secular use. ואלה ברכב ואלה בסוסים, they use horses, they use chariots, obviously it's quoting from תהילים, ואנחנו בשם השם אלוקינו נזכיר. So we use the name of Hashem, that is Yiddish. And נלך בדרכי אבותינו הקדושים, ולא נסור מדבריהם ימין ושמאל, we shouldn't move a budge even somewhat to the right or to the left. And באתי קצת בדברים מועטים, לברר שורש העניין של חינוך אבותינו. These are my small words. Obviously, the response is more lengthier than what I gave here, but that's I think, the most important argument here. Yes. Yeah, of course, there is some. There is some, but that's a holy language, so that's allowed to use holy words in the holy language. But Ivrit, that's the modern, is a secular language, and it's a chol, a mundane, and you take holy and you make it into mundane. Yeah, you don't have to convince me. It's
It's very interesting because, Germany become holy. And
yeah, old German, yes.
yeah, old German doesn't matter. The German.
You understand, I didn't bring this response right now in order to argue with it, and obviously I mean, I give this show in English and I speak Hebrew in my life, so I didn't give you this response because I think that anyone here would change his minhagim according to this response. As I said, he himself in the beginning, he says, I only give this answer to Anash. And if you're not interested in hearing my mind, that's fine, he says. I only write it to those that are interested in my opinion. I don't think that he thought that, by the way, he also opened the yeshiva for Sephardic boys, because there were not enough yeshivas. He said, I need to take responsibility for that as well. And this yeshiva was operating for a few years, till the Sephardim themselves began to open their own yeshivot, and then he closed down. But, excuse me? No, I think it was in Hebrew, but you know what? I really don't know. I really don't know. But I mean, I don't think that he thought that that the Yemenites should begin to speak Yiddish because that is the way of our Avoteinu HaKadoshim. I think he understood very well. So that's why he is limiting himself. But that's part of the point. He wants to keep his own segregated, that's the word, community, or his own closed community, separated from the rest of the Jews in Eretz Israel. He wants to live in Eretz Israel. And he wants to cooperate to a degree. Now, even that was much too open for the Satmar Rebbe, for example. But that's how he saw, that was the lesson that he learned, as I said, from the Holocaust, from the Shoah. And, excuse me, there?
Sons.
It's the name of a city in Galicia also, I think. His great-grandfather came from there. That's the name of from there they took the name. He himself lived in Klausenburger. No, again, in Klausenburger lived for 20 years. Didn't do the calculation right now. And later he lived in the USA and in Netanya more. But it doesn't sound the same. The Union City here. So Klausenburger sounds much better. So they cling to that. He passed away. Just one other example for keeping separated, even from other Haredi Jews. In Sanz, they keep Rabbeinu Tam time. That means that they end the Shabbat 40 minutes later. It's not only a Chumrah, because that's what they did in Europe, that's what he is doing.
They start as well later?
I don't think so. But I'm not sure. Maybe they'll be more lenient if there is a need. But they end the Shabbat and they would not open the streets. until Zman Rabbeinu Tam. If someone had been in the hotel would not resume his activities up to Rabbeinu Tam, and also in the hospital. They are not happy if you are doing Ma'ariv or if you're doing Havdalah before the Rabbeinu Tam time. They try to be very stringent about that. Of course, it's difficult to control, but that's the way they see it. And there are big signs in the hospital if people go there on Shabbat saying, "Please respect our minhagim. Here, Shabbat lives at Rabbeinu Tam time." Yes.
Did he have more children?
Yes, he had five more children with the second wife. I think it's an excellent question. I think it's five, two boys and three girls, if I remember correctly.
They followed him as leader.
Yes, yeah, he was a very strong personality. I don't think that you could escape it in any way. And his two boys. So let's say just another example of he waged wars for Zman Rabbeinu Tam. And that's part of what kept his community separated, because if all your times are different, then you're separated. There are a few beautiful videos. Just click the Klausenburger Rebbe. He spoke very, very strong, very dramatically, and he tells these stories, beautiful, beautiful stories, and they have subtitles, and you can see in Hebrew, in English, beautiful. His tefillot were very exciting. He would speak during the tefillah. That was very unique. He would be in the middle of the tefillah, and suddenly he would begin to speak in Yiddish. He would engage the people, the Hasidim around him. He would speak to Hashem. He would things again. I think that survivors had privileges that people that were not there do not own. And he would speak to Hashem. He would say, "You did to me that and that, but I am with you. Now you have to give me that." He would really speak with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in very close terms, you may say. And again, that's a privilege of people that are really, really close, I think. He was niftar in 1994, in Tet Tammuz, Tafshin Nun Daled. So he lived a pretty long life. 89. It's nice, 89. I mean, you can live longer. But taking into account everything that he went through, I think that's impressive. He was buried in Kiryat Sanz, in Netanya. He didn't want to go to Yerushalayim or to be buried. He wanted to be buried where he rebuilt the Jewish world that he saw. And in his will, he splitted the leadership between his two boys. One became, Rav Tzvi Elimelech Halberstam became the tzanzer in Netanya. I believe he's still the tzanzer right now. And the other, Rav Shmuel David Halberstam, became the tzanz Klausenburger Brooklyn Rebbe. So that's how they split the Admorut, which I guess was the right thing to do. Baruch Hashem, there were no fights. Each one got his own Chassidut. And he left after him 7 volumes of responsa, and I think 20 very, very multi-volume series called Shefa Chaim, which is his Divrei Torah. It was not printed in his life. He had a Mesorah tradition from his predecessors that they did not printed Divrei Torah while they were still alive. But after his death, things were already prepared, and they only had to collect a little, and they printed many, many volumes, many beautiful Divrei Torah for those that like this type of Hasidic words and Hasidic drashot. That's beautiful. It's called Shefa Chaim, and you can, if you want, you can go to a library and look at that. But beyond the specific Divrei Torah, which again, Baruch Hashem, are a lot, and his responsa, which are very interesting, his personality I return to these two things of hope and faith. He represents the resilience of the Jewish people in front of the most horrific events of our history. And his ability to stand firm to what he believed in, and not only to stand firm to that, but also to rebuild and re-emerge from the ashes. I think that's, to a large degree, that's something that we should all be inspired, regardless of the extent to which we identify with a specific position of his. But just the spirit, this unbreakable spirit, that's, I think, what should accompany us from this shiurim. So, thank you. And we'll meet Be'ezrat Hashem next week.
Thank you. There's also a beach.
The Hofzahns?
For men and
Of course. Of course.
Back the two.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really?